Talking trash about your opponent stands as one of the defining features of UFC competition. But what happens when your words don't sync up with your actions? Look at Conor McGregor. The ever-cocky Irishman tore Nate Diaz to shreds in the build-up to their first fight at UFC 196 before eating all of those words in defeat. He then had to rise up, eat some humble pie, and let his actions do the talking in the rematch, which they did, and I'm not talking about the bottle throwing. Trash talking is by no means an easy game. There's a fine line between being a Mystic Mac or a hot air spewing afterthought. I'm Gareth Morgan from What Culture Combat, and here are 10 UFC stars who couldn't back up their words. Number 10, CHAEL Sonnen. In 2010, the bad guy CHAEL Sonnen was embroiled in a highly anticipated clash with one of the titans of the sport in Anderson Silva. Instead of shaking hands and agreeing to let the better man win, Sonnen took it upon himself to burrow under the skin of the Brazilian, coming out with remarks such as threatening to drag Anderson Silva out of a hotel and beat him up whenever he wanted, and claiming he was the toughest guy in the company, period. Sonnen had put himself on quite the pedestal en route to UFC 117. In the end, Silva submitted Sonnen in the Fight of the Year winner. However, the bad guy clearly didn't learn from his mistakes and waxed lyrically about how the two's skills were not even close on the road to their rematch at UFC 148. Sonnen would lose that bout too. Sonnen hasn't been sighted outside of Silva's hotel room since, and it's probably wise for him to keep it that way. Number 9, Quinton Rampage Jackson. Quinton Rampage Jackson loved to bark. Want some proof? Look no further than his epic stint as a coach on The Ultimate Fighter heavyweights, going toe-to-toe with former UFC light heavyweight champion Rashad Evans. Focusing more on pissing Evans off than actually, trying to prepare his team members, contenders spoke of how the two would go back and forth for 30 days a minute. Showing more ferocity in destroying a door than in the genuine fight between the two, Jackson would be forced to eat his own words. He was defeated by Evans via unanimous decision at UFC 114. Embarrassing as that loss was, Jackson would actually then go on to win his next two fights before showing a little more humility in the run-up to his eventual loss to John Jones for the light heavyweight title at UFC 135. At least he learnt something from his humbling. Number 8, CRIS CYBORG. In 2018, not many people had the nerve to call out featherweight champion CRIS CYBORG, but Amanda Nunes wasn't like most people. Nunes finally felt as though she would have enough time to prepare for such an enormous challenge. But the fact that it took so long to be made a reality clearly irked CYBORG, and she warned Nunes, when you call CYBORG out, you have to handle it. That is terrifying. Nunes was confident in her approach and didn't shy away from wanting to be prepared for her rival. It proved to be a wise decision, as she took out CYBORG in 51 seconds at UFC 232 and became the featherweight champion, adding to her bantamweight crown. CYBORG is now pining for a cross-promotional rematch, with her now playing a trade in Bellator. But perhaps she should maybe take a leaf out of Nunes' book and give herself 9 months worth of prep before taking on the double champ again. Number 7, Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier may be a die-hard WWE fan, but he hasn't quite mastered the art of the convincing babyface promo. Always coming across like more of a teddy bear who's had his porridge eaten than an actual fighter, Cormier isn't known for being the most intimidating talker in the game. His feud with John Jones encapsulated that perfectly. Cut in a confident figure in their press conferences before both fights, Cormier begged Jones to try and murder him in the lead up to their first bout. Sounding like a true cartoon superhero, DC even told his adversary that you could never kill me. Yep, he actually said that. DC was beaten by unanimous decision in their first encounter at UFC 182, and was conclusively knocked out in the rematch at UFC 214, even though that decision was overturned due to Jones failing a drug test. Even with the result being changed, Cormier still came out of both fights with egg on his face. Number 6, Brock Lesnar. It's not often that we hear of Brock Lesnar eating humble pie, but even the Beast Incarnate has been made to look like a bit of a fool after committing to a poor choice of words. After Lesnar had beaten Frank Mir at UFC 100, unifying the UFC heavyweight title, he announced to the world that he will be going home to drink a Coors Light because Bud Light won't pay him nothing. I'm so sorry for that American accent, that was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. This understandably pissed off Dana White, who apparently hammered Lesnar backstage for undermining one of UFC's major sponsors. which takes some serious balls if you stood in front of that gorilla. Lesnar would backtrack almost immediately by stating that he comes from a business that is purely entertainment, even going as far as to admit that he screwed up. It made the usually indomitable Force look like a bit of a chump, and established that Lesnar couldn't have everything his own way while signed to Dana White's company. Number 5, Beth Correia. When you opt to make a fight that little bit more personal, you have to be prepared for whatever animosity comes your way. Beth Correia felt the need to do just that in the lead up to her bantamweight championship bout with Ronda Rousey in 2015. And you can bet she wishes she'd chosen a dialogue more wisely in hindsight. In the early stages of their rivalry, Correia poked fun at Rousey's attempts to break into Hollywood and claimed to be the real MMA fighter of the two. Things then took a bitter turn when Correia brought up Rousey's troubles with drug and alcohol abuse, patronizing her with a "don't do drugs again" comment. Ooh. Correia then hammered the final nail in her own coffin when she told Combat that she hoped Rousey did not kill herself after the conclusion of the matchup, knowing full well that the baddest woman on the planet's father had taken his own life when she was younger. As you've probably guessed, Rousey absolutely dismantled Correia in just 34 seconds at UFC 190. That's what you get. Number 4, Jon Jones. At this point, it would probably be fair to assume that Jon Jones is actually a cat, given the amount of lives he's been given in UFC. Bones is unquestionably one of the best to ever step inside the octagon, so it's just a shame that his actions and words outside of the cage are so often his undoing. Take your pick from his plea to be given an opportunity to redeem himself after being sentenced to 18 months probation for his involvement in a hit-and-run accident, or stating that he'd never ever taken any kind of performance-enhancing drugs. Jones has a history of his words coming back to haunt him. The latter statement proved to be quite the stick to beat him with after failing his second drug test following his rematch with Daniel Cormier at UFC 214. Jones tested positive for turinabol, an anabolic steroid, being banned from competition for 15 months. Jones's reputation has taken a few catastrophic hits over the last couple of years, so he needs to start letting his actions prove he's a changed man. Number 3, Michael Bisping. Before finally going on to win the UFC middleweight championship in the twilight of his career, Michael Bisping had been hanging around that title picture for years, despite not ever really backing up his ability to verbally put down anyone who was lined up in front of him. Though always entertaining, Bisping's incredible insults usually came before a sizable fall. That's not to say that Bisping should have just quit his pre-fight antics altogether, as let's be honest, they were pretty hilarious most of the time. However, questioning whether his opponent had a penis or not, as he did before the Vitor Belfort fight, made him look juvenile and came back to haunt him when he got his retina detached by that very same adversary at UFC on Fox in 2013. Bisping will go down as one of the finest talkers to ever hold a UFC microphone. It's just a shame that the majority of his best digs came before getting his ass handed to him. Number 2, Eddie Alvarez. When kick-starting a verbal war, it wouldn't exactly be labelled as a sensible decision to pick on one of the most notorious trash talkers to ever step onto a sporting stage. Yet in 2016, when paired up to defend his lightweight title against Conor McGregor, Eddie Alvarez did just that and was made to look like a complete clown thanks to his poor choice of words. Bragging about being able to get it done in any manner, Alvarez went on to denounce McGregor's defense as terrible, and even labeled it as the worst in the division. Not protecting himself after going in for the kill, his comments on McGregor's defense acted as the ultimate irony when Alvarez was caught out by a deadly counter left and TKO'd in the second round at UFC 205. Number 1, Josh Koscheck. Taking on George St. Pierre was never going to be an easy task, and Josh Koscheck found himself having to resort to desperate tactics when he went head-to-head with the Canadian on The Ultimate Fighter Season 12 in 2010. Celebrating obnoxiously whenever his team scored a victory, Koscheck would routinely showcase limp attempts at getting the upper hand over his rival coach. GSP would never rise to any of these provocations, simply lying in wait for the moment he would get his hands on Koscheck. He would finally get that chance at UFC 124. The ever-brash Koscheck had a message for the welterweight champion going into their much-anticipated title fight, and it was simple. George, you better work on your power because I'm gonna force you to stand up with me when we fight, and I'm gonna knock you out. You can see where this is going. In convincing fashion, GSP would dissect Koscheck for 5 rounds. The scorecard read 50-45, but it was Koscheck's face that told the real story. With his right eye swollen shut early on and his orbital bone broken, the 23,000 fans in attendance watched as the former coach was given a schooling inside of the octagon. That's what you get, Koscheck. And that is our list. Know of any other fighters who couldn't back up their words inside of the octagon? Feel free to let us know in the comment section below. And do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. I've been Gareth Morgan from What Culture Combat, and I'm sure I'm going to see you soon.